You can hold it. Yeah. We're on hour 6, which is very funny. We're making it through. We're getting to the end. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Inside Tabletop. I am here with my friend Christian Cameron, author of such a great series as Masters and Mages. What's your most recent that you've just published?
Artifact Space.
Artifact Space, your sci-fi one.
And Against All Gods, which I just gave you a copy.
You just gave me a copy.
In a very self-serving way, which I'll hold up a copy now, but it's in the other room.
It's okay. They're all going to flash next to your head. I'm going to steal pictures from the Amazon page and have them flash next to you so people can find you. But you are a veteran author, full-time writing, speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy. Artifact Space is science fiction, very much in the vein of Infinity, where it's a hard sci-fi meets anime sort of
that kind of thing.
Which I haven't read yet, which I'm very excited to read. And my favorite was the Masters and Mages that I've told you I've read twice now, which is I would almost say like an Odysseic kind of story. Someone leaving their small world and the world getting bigger and then coming back.
Sure.
I love that.
I'll take that.
Yeah, I love that in a fantasy sense. Great series. And we're here today. We just done an episode, if you haven't watched, about writing, basically the intersection of like writing in the way that people might think it happens versus kind of the reality of today, and that's always a moving target. But today we're going to actually talk about the intersection between writing and gaming, because this is a big thing for you. You've used gaming,
sure is, your
whole career basically as a jumping off point.
Absolutely. So I wrote 8 spy novels, and they had no gaming in them at all. But ever since then, all my books have to do with gaming. I could literally go through every speculative fiction book and name for you what game either inspired it, helped it, or was used as a writing aid.
Okay.
So I play a lot of Black Powder, which I actually gamed out some of the battles in the series that you were talking about, and I can still tell you what happened in some of those because they were pretty moving games. I love Infinity. I share your passion for Infinity, and I ran an Infinity role-playing game while I was writing Artifact Space. Now, I ran Infinity. I did not run Artifact Space, but I would get ideas, or characters would do really interesting things, which none of this translates directly. You and I have had this conversation, but it's not like a one-to-one correspondence where Chase Patterson's playing a character and he does a thing and I put that thing into the book. It's more like somebody does something and it's very interesting and it makes me think that the character reaction that I've already written isn't the authentic reaction. Mm-hmm. And now that I've seen a real human being in this pressure environment, this was the real reaction. And it's stuff like that, but I still find it really moving. And then I've got to say the coolness factor, that is in many ways the biggest thing. The way I like to refer to this, and I have to warn all of you out there that Ash and I have been talking for 5 hours, so this conversation itself will be internally self-referential. But I always call it Batman's cloak. Sure. The first big Batman movie, and Batman comes down, the cloak flutters behind him, and you go wow.
That's Batman.
That's Batman. And that is an important factor that often I get out of gaming. Whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or the Infinity role-playing system, which I think is quite a good game, or tabletop gaming, I find moments that are moving, that are really exciting, really cool, and often that makes the whole game. I don't care whether I won or lost. And I'll give you a completely ridiculous example. I told you that my Infinity City has high rises. I was playing another guy, and he took an incredible risk and basically jumped off a high rise. and he had super jump and he had various other things, and he pulled it off. And we both went it
was satisfying for both of you because of the moment. Yeah. That's interesting.
I lost. But
the moment was so cool that no one cared.
Yes.
It's funny because I do think that that experience you're describing and how that inspires your writing and how you get to have that experience. We are in a place where the pop culture experience in gaming is starting to diverge from that, where the table as a heads up display of battlefield information and the overlays of objective zones and kind of the esportsification of gaming is removing. I'm not saying people don't still have that experience, but it makes it harder to have that camera be a little movie happening in front of you. And I do wonder, like what that means, because there's obviously a bunch of designers in the Industry, especially, running in the opposite direction. In the last episode, we talked a little bit about Rangers of Shadowdeep, but that's one in particular that I think is Joe wrote a game that's all about capturing those scenes. And it's episodic in that way about capturing those scenes. And I know you love that game too.
Yeah, I do.
Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. So I'm going to go to nuts and bolts. One of the great things about Rangers of Shadowdeep, besides the fact that it helped get me through COVID, is that I'm a toy intensive hobbyist.
Right.
So I like painting the models. I like building the terrain. And one of the things I've really consistently liked about Rangers of Shadowdeep, and I'm going to be very particular, is how it gave me the impetus to build the village. I'm going to build a village. So I read the scenario, and believe it or not, I have a technique. I read as little of the scenario as I can while trying to get, what do I need for terrain? What do I need for models? Who are the bad guys? I want to have all that. But I want to have it all done. I don't want to be scrambling around the basement looking for wolves. I want to have it all done, and I want it all to be nice. And I have two gurus in gaming. You are one of them. The other is my friend Steve Callahan. Here's a nod to Steve Callahan in Philadelphia if he's listening. And it's Steve who taught me that you can paint your rulers to match the terrain. Yeah. So that, except then I lose them on the tabletop. Don't tell
they
Steve
blend
that.
In.
He used to paint his dice. So they blend, make it as inobtrusive as possible. All your casualty markers should be casualties. You paint extra little men who are lying down. And I find, especially in Rangers, that adds immeasurably. Like as my party starts to get hit, that the bodies are lying there. I haven't taken the miniatures off, and I find that adds to my tension in a solo game, which is fun if you believe in that. And I have even considered painting dead wolves and dead vampires.
Sure.
And,
how far do you want to take that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But anything that builds the moment, and I want to double down on this and say, I actually learned this not from gaming, but from reenacting. So anything that builds immersion, and that is our reenacting phrase that I want to inflict on you in gaming.
Right.
Anything that builds immersion, that puts you in the moment. And people say all the time in interviews like this, like, do you really feel like you're back in the time? Well, never for more than a second or two, but those seconds are precious. And I would argue the same thing is in gaming. I think everyone who's even played pencil and paper D&D once has had something happen where for a moment it mattered.
That theater of the mind.
Right?
Captured them, exactly.
So anything I can do that makes the theater of the mind better in the moment is worth doing.
It's famous. I think it's famously common, actually, that people in this industry, writers, designers, people who own game companies, they do a lot of that reenacting stuff. John Stallard famously does English Civil War.
The Perry Brothers,
blew off one of their hands reenacting with a cannon.
Let's not even go.
Yeah, and then you've got Duncan Rhodes, a much younger person from a different generation who does Napoleonics. Yeah, and I find that really interesting. That there is some common that theater of the mind, but be it from D&D, reenacting, writing, that capturing a moment in space and time and almost feeling drawn into it still has value today. And there's a whole market, a sub-market to the side of kind of the pop culture way that it's moving to more of like here's the battlefield information kind of digital view of the tabletop. There are people who crave that and run towards it. And it's really interesting that translates into all these different parts of the industry, like that intersects in such a different way.
What I'm going to say may seem counterintuitive, but when I paint the wolves and paint the dead wolves and whatever, I'm still completely controlling my imagination of Joseph McCullough's world. And so in the theater of the mind, it's still in my mind. And that is slightly different from entering the Marvel universe.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, the Marvel universe is pretty much made. It's cooked. And I completely appreciate that some people love digital games. I find it too cooked. I want to be able to decide what vampires look like in my version. And then I'll paint them the way I wanted them. And I'm just going to completely nerd out here because this is the place to be nerd. I feel I'm
you're safe. You're among friends. Yeah. In this house, we nerd out.
I love combing Etsy and every miniatures manufacturer in the world for the vampire I want.
Yeah. It's funny. My friend Jay is exactly like that. Our text threads are literally for the 48 hours after he leaves here, when we've agreed what we're going to meet up and do the next week, just him sending me the thing that he's found that's like the right miniature, the right thing.
Yep.
That's such a common experience, I think, for people who can really imagine the moment. They're looking for the right thing to capture what's up here on the table. I love that.
So I just want to say I wrote an entire Rangers of Shadow Deep novel for free. It's on my website for free. Anybody is welcome to visit.
We'll link it in the description. You can go check it out.
And I only mention this because I didn't need to be paid. Loved the game so much, and I write fast. But I really wanted to enter in. I wanted to go all the way into that universe, more than I could even get in gaming. And so I just created my own thread, which, Joe may or may not like. I don't know. But to me, I'm going back to the first question. The intersection it's so intersectional, it's almost invisible. I can't imagine sitting down to write a book without either being inspired by or aided by a game or physical artifacts. Like I look at historical artifacts and I find them very inspiring, or reenacting, or just camping, cooking a meal, or frankly, listening to people talk in coffee shops, which I will admit sometimes inspires dialogue.
Is equally fascinating, I'm sure. You do a lot of your writing, don't you, in coffee shops?
I sure do.
That's great.
Pastry and coffee.
I mean, it's funny because I do think that is a underappreciated in the current moment element of what makes tabletop gaming special, is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to capture a moment in time physically in front of you, almost in like a stop motion way where the pieces are moving around so that you're seeing this little stop motion movie in front of you. And I feel resonance with that, and you feel resonance with that. And I think a lot of people you watching today feel resonance with that. And that's maybe, I don't think it's not happening today in tabletop board game, because I think inarguably the miniatures are nicer than they've ever been.
Incredible.
Like we live in such a like Pollyanna world.
Can you flash a picture of minifigs in 1979?
It's funny how I'm still nostalgic for that time, because it makes me feel a way, because it makes me remember my youth and how I was, and the free time I had and the freedom I had in that moment. But inarguably, there's never been basically we're playing Warhammer in 4K. You know what I mean? If we were playing Warhammer in like low res before, it's in 4K now. Like it's as crystallized and beautiful imagining of what it can be. And maybe it's a little less messy and punk rock because of that, but it's also beautiful. So I do think that people that's still expressible, and there are people out there that still enjoy that. But it's funny how that becomes so important that it needs to be its own game mode now in Warhammer. Like you have to have a path to glory or a campaign system set off to one side to kind of remind people that that's possible. I
love campaign systems. My favorite thing, give me any game where Private Toha can gain +1 on his shooting, because I just love that stuff.
I want to be surprised. I want Cracker Jacks. I want to open the box and not know what's in there already. I think games providing that in any meaningful way, and of course dice do that with the random numbers that happen. You get that automatically. But so much of winning a game is making it a foregone conclusion, like hedging your own bets so that it just happens the way you want it to happen. I love any type of circumstance in writing. I think that's again, if we come back to Rangers or even Infinity, there's so much a complexity of options in Infinity that everybody tries to solve the same problem in a million different ways. Whereas in Rangers of Shadow Deep, there's just literally force majeures happening, random events and stuff that pop up. And it's like, oh, now the spiders come out of the trees. And it's just like, there was no spiders. And it's just a surprise. I do think that that's something that I chase. And I can see how that you find inspiration everywhere. Inspiration through gaming is such a joy when it
So I've got a question for you, because then I'll show you mine. Do you fall in love with individual miniatures?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I got a birthday present from Sean Sutter at Metal King Studio that was a card. He wrote rules and stats for the Ranger that I took through Relic Blades campaign system called the Seeker's Handbook. And Owen and I played a whole bunch of games, and I rolled so many ones and died so poorly. This individual was so unlucky. His name was Braun Bearkiller, and he was he got his dick dragged through the dirt for the entire campaign. So Sean, for my birthday, sent me a card that was his handmade drawing of the model I'd painted. who became my ranger in Rangers of Shadowdeep. But his special rule was that he had the Bear Killer's luck. He was allowed to reroll any one for any reason ever rolled. And that was Sean basically being like, I get it. Okay, please keep playing the game. I know you're unlucky. Here you go. And he'll live, like, he literally lives forever in my memories that I have this Legends character now in Sean's universe that emerged from the gameplay of that game. And he's like part of the Legends universe of Relic Blade now, which I think is so cool. And it makes me so happy. The other version of that was we played through the Frostgrave campaign, and Owen's character Red, she was a necromancer, I think. No, she's a demonologist. And I had a summoner named Redgar and Red. No, Ranulph, Redgar. I can't remember my wizard's name now. But their antics were so legendary that the cover of the Wizard's Conclave book is the two of them fighting. So they did a cover basically of the game of those two characters at war with each other, because we played through every single mission when the game first came out. And those two campaigns, I think, are the most memorable because I got to spend time with a friend playing these linked scenarios over and over again. What about you?
So I love your answer, but I was actually thinking of actual physical miniatures.
Oh, okay.
Like, are there particular miniatures you're just like, yes, this is everything I ever wanted in?
Someone else has produced. That really resonate with me. Okay. So
I'll start off.
You start off. Yeah. Let me think for a second.
Literally, and I have never admitted this before, the whole artifact space universe exists because of a single Infinity model.
Okay.
And I just started it's a Starmada figure, and I started painting her, and I'm like, this is the coolest figure I've ever handled. And I love the figure for a whole lot of reasons, some of which are just non-gender bias. Part of which is that she's correctly holding a handgun.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Not like in some wild Marvel
not
pose.
like some,
And but I was just like, wow, this is really good, and there's a lot of other inspirations for artifact space. But once in a while, I find a miniature that I just think like, this is the bee's knees, and I'm suddenly drawing a blank. He was a character in one of the early Necromunda comics, and they produced
Cal Jericho.
Yes, and they produced a limited edition, and I got one. I can't even remember why. Did you give it to me? I
might have given it to you, but it was also a miniature that was like a store birthday miniature we sold for one of the
I think it was you.
Birthdays. Probably anyway, could have been me.
And that became my Imperial Guard commissar with some alterations. I just loved that miniature.
That's a great miniature. Yeah,
died on many
got
battlefields.
his two pistols. Yeah, he's a great. Cal Jericho is like the original like you wanted to be this guy. He was so cool and effortlessly. He's basically Star-Lord for
exactly. He's Star-Lord, but just also a beautifully realized miniature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I think the one that captured my imagination that way when I was younger would have been an early second edition miniature, and it would have been the Ragnar Blackmane miniature for the Space Wolves. Because he was one of the few characters that they gave us a full story to. He had these things like that had rules, like he had boot knives, and so his boot knives were sculpted on him.
Yeah.
He could like retract basically claws from his feet when he kicked somebody. And he was a Jez Goodwin sculpt, so of course this is the height of all sculpting basically back then, because there's never been a miniature. Jez Goodwin probably has had the most in circulation sculpting, I think, of any workshop sculptor. There's miniatures he sculpted that are still available for sale today. And that's a long career for having a putty pushed sculpt now at this point. And I loved that miniature. I loved his backstory. I loved the fact that he just had a bolt pistol and chainsword, but he was so cool at fighting with them that he was better than everybody else no matter what. And that captured my imagination, that he was young and inexperienced, but was still cool enough to become a Wolf Lord, and that his prowess basically outweighed. It spoke to all the power fantasy shit in me as a young man, basically.
Right.
And the miniature perfectly captured it.
All I'm trying to get to here is when we're talking about the intersection, that physicality matters.
Sure.
Whether it's having the right trees or having the right miniatures. And this is something that I hope the industry gets. It's not just about coolness. It's about capturing it all so that the dream is made real for a moment.
Yeah, they still matter. The models still matter.
Yeah.
And you only, like, for the most part, until they manage to somehow commercialize the digital playing of a game, the companies exist because they sell miniatures or they sell books, or they sell physical products. The miniatures still have to matter. And we're in an interesting place now where that's in motion. I don't know if you and I have that conversation.
Yeah.
Because the companies don't necessarily provide them anymore. There's so many avenues to get beautiful miniatures sculpted by outcasts from the video game industry that you can 3D print yourself at home. We're in a weird state where more people's imagination is being given to you as an option as a consumer to go and buy.
And is that incredible?
Good? Yeah. I don't know if it's, I can't put a value judgment on it. I think it's the natural outcome of like this kind of older industry getting swept up in the march of technology.
I am very interested in this subject, and I'm just going to roll it back to Rangers of Shadow Deep. So I hope Joseph McCullough appreciates the time we're spending. But I'm just going to say, like, so he was completely non-denominational.
Sure.
I think his assumption was that if you're an old Dungeons and Dragons player, you have all this stuff in your basement already.
You got an old cookie box full of D&D.
And unfortunately, what he didn't know is that most of my old D&D stuff went with my military career. So I was starting from scratch. Like, literally, I didn't have any of that stuff.
Right.
So I'm going like, wolves, eh? You know, like, but the intersection here is, or what I think is worth talking about is, as you say, the 3D printing world. So suddenly, you want wolves? I mean, without even going to Etsy, wow, there's a lot of wolves out there. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of female rangers with longsword.
Yep.
And to nerd out again, I also do Western martial arts, and I like armor and swords, and I really like them to be functional. So I'm very critical about miniatures because I tend to look at miniatures and go like, oh God, no one would ever wear that, and that is not armor, and that is not a helmet.
It's not how you hold a sword.
No, that's not how you. And so I really value this explosion in new sculptors who often are driven by better models, I think, and they have access to new CAD/CAM, I assume. I mean,
well, I mean, it's all over the place. I think it's coming from all different avenues. You have some people like Trey Manor, who's a wonderful sculptor, Redbox Miniatures. He was a traditional putty pusher. He pushed himself to learn how to sculpt digitally. Same with Kev White, right? He's a sculptor from the 90s.
Yep.
A lot of these sculptors are either doing both or learning new skills and pushing themselves. And I'm in awe of the people in this industry that are staying current with how fast technology is moving. And then you also have a massive bubble burst in 3D design in the video game industry that's led to the growth, I think, in the tabletop industry, because you have people coming with the skills already,
right,
and they know how to make it in a game, which means they know a printer can spit it out, and they just have to learn the sort of like the how to color inside the lines to make it something that prints well and becomes a physical object. So we live in the glory days of model access.
And sorry, I realize this is the last program that I'm inserting this on, but I do try and tell people, like, this is the golden age. Yeah. If you think the 1960s was the golden age for speculative fiction, look at what you can get now.
It's true, yeah.
And I feel the same way about miniatures. You can get anything.
It's almost lost in the amount available. Like, the scarcity now isn't because it doesn't exist or it's hard to find. It's because there's so much you have to pick through it. And you can pick through it to find exactly what you were looking for, to get that mind's eye exactly on the tabletop.
Because I'm 61 years old, sometimes I still have an antiquated point of view. And a year ago, I was painting Ottoman Turks, as one does. I'm like, Ottoman baggage camels. I'll bet I'm going to have to scratch build these.
Right.
Nope.
Nope. Probably not, to be honest with you. Yeah. If it's the, I guess we could call it rule 35 of the internet. If there's a miniature, it probably exists out there somewhere and someone sculpted it. That's crazy. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, because I love talking about where all of these things meet in the middle. And because we're an idea-driven industry in tabletop, getting the point of view of an author on how those things go back and forth, on how the writers create so much of what ends up on the table, but also draw so much back from RPGs, tabletop miniature games, war games, all
Absolutely.
that stuff.
And while we're on the subject, if anyone out there would like to write the Artifact Space game, I'm ready to help you provide content.
Fair enough. I will talk to you about that off camera. We'll figure it out. We'll get a brand going. So yeah, go check out Christian's. If you want to check out the Rangers Shadow Deep stuff, I'll link it all in the description. Go check out his novels and his latest book. And of course, Artifact Space. If you're an Infinity fan, that same level of sort of like pop manga inspired, but also hard sci-fi stuff is in there too.
Sorry, Ash, I have to say this, but I'm Miles Cameron.
Miles Cameron, sorry, as a
fantasy
writer, that's
speculative
right, yes.
world. I'm Christian Cameron in the real world.
In the real world, that's right. Yeah, your nom de plume is Miles Cameron. If you're looking him up online.
Thanks so much, Ash. This is great. We should do this more often.
We will.
Okay.
I already made you promise off camera. I really did. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.